everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for the NRC FAHE webinar series. We're going to give people just another minute or two to join in, so we'll be right back with you in a couple of minutes. Okay, hello again, everyone. My name is Amy Salazar, and I'm on the executive leadership team for the National Research Collaborative for Foster Alumni in Higher Ed. Thanks so much for joining us today for our webinar series. First, I want to remind everyone, or if you haven't been to one of our webinars before, that today's webinar will be recorded and available on the NRC FAHE website, and you can see the link to our website on the slide that's being shared on the screen right now. Before we get started with today's webinar, I wanted to just mention our next scheduled webinar. So our September webinar will be held on Thursday, September 24th at 11 Pacific time, 2 Eastern time. And the presenters will be Doctors James Lanich and Laisha Lewis from Educational Results Partnership. And their presentation will be entitled Sharpening the View, Improving Foster Youth Data to Boost Educational Outcomes. And it will highlight the importance of actionable data to improve educational outcomes for foster youth in California. So please, we'd love for you to join us for that. You can register, you can find the registration link in the listserv email on our website, or if you're having any trouble with registrations, please just feel free to email me at amy.salazar@wsu.edu. So today we have our presenter today will be Angelique Day. She is the leader of the NRC FAHE. She's an associate professor in the School of Social Work at the University of Washington and a faculty affiliate of Partners for Our Children, which is an independent research and policy think tank associated with the University of Washington School of Social Work. And again, she's also the co-founder of the National Research Collaborative on Foster Alumni and Higher Education. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Angelique. Oh, I'm sorry, let me say one more thing. I forgot to mention the Q&A. So usually what we do for our Q&A is we have people hold questions until the end. You could go ahead and type them in the chat box as we go, and then I'll read those out to Angelique at the end, unless she chooses to ask for people to go ahead and send in questions. So that's usually what we do, but if Angelique gives us other instructions, then we will follow those as well. So I'll hand it over to you. Thanks, Angelique.
No problem. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, good morning / afternoon, depending on where in the country you're tuning in. So I want to let you know that I have embedded several links. So if you see the orange text, there's an embedded link there. And I want to encourage folks when this PowerPoint is available and uploaded on the website to go in, because there's so much more that can be said than what I'll have time to present today. So I want to make sure that you all have access to everything you need to be the best advocate and most politically savvy researchers that you can be on this topical area. Okay, I am trying to move my slides, Amy, and I'm not sure why they're not working.
I could share if you're not able to do it, I could share them and maybe you could tell me when you want me to.
Yeah, I can do that. They're frozen for some reason. It's not letting me.
Okay. I think maybe if you want to stop sharing your slides,
Okay.
and then I can share yours, pull those up. And
all right. Sorry about the technical difficulties, folks.
sorry. Also for me, just trying to move some things around on my screens. Okay, can everyone see the screen now? Or Angelique, can you see that?
Yeah, I can see it just fine.
Let me see.
I'm going to have you move to the next slide.
Okay.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay. So as many of you are aware, when COVID hit, lobbyists were really quick to ask some really important questions about our population, and some of those advocates may have been some of you. So for child welfare involved youth who are in college, what does it mean if they're told to go home or take classes online if they don't have internet access at home or do not have a home to return to? We know, unfortunately, for many youth in foster care or formerly in foster care, on-campus housing is their only housing option. And for many of these youth and young adults on campus, there is no place to go once school has closed their dormitory or on-campus housing, resulting in some real-time potential for homelessness for many of these youth. And I'm not sure if any of you have been exploring this on your specific institution. I know there's been some organized movement in Washington to check all universities here. But unfortunately, there was not a federal mandate, but a memo from Jerry Milner asking for these types of things to happen. I would love to hear in our Q&A session a little bit later in this talk to understand from you all where your universities have been in exploring this unique phenomenon for our population. So on this slide here, you'll see embedded the actual memo from Jerry Milner, which was published on March 13, 2020. And he put out this memo urging the nation's child welfare agencies to immediately contact youth in foster care or formerly in foster care who live on college campuses, and to work with all colleges and universities to provide appropriate housing to meet their special needs, or to arrange alternative housing so that no young adult is without housing in this COVID time period. Again, a memo is not a statute or a law. You can't force implementation. It is only a suggestion. So it would be interesting to see how impactful that was and how all of you utilize that resource or know how your state did. Okay. In addition to this memo being attached to this PowerPoint here, just a reminder that it was also sent out to all of you earlier in an earlier NRC listserv post that went out, so that you can reference that at your leisure. I now want to point out some of the legislative opportunities that have arisen in March 2020 or later that do have the potential to support the young people that are on our college campuses. So I know many of you have heard of the CARES Act. The CARES Act includes $4 billion to address the impact of COVID-19 among individuals and families who are homeless, receiving homeless assistance, or at risk of homelessness, and to support additional homeless assistance prevention and eviction prevention assistance. And I wanted to bring that to your attention because if you are on a college campus where there has not been policy and procedures put in place for the young people on your campus, all states received formula allocations under the CARES Act specifically to address housing issues. And then what I have here is a breakdown Specifically, there was a $25 million allocation in the CARES Act specifically for runaway and homeless youth programs. Again, that was formula fed to each state for any program that was operating a runaway and homeless youth program prior to COVID was eligible for this funding. And that this is $25 million on top of the normally appropriated funds that go through the federal appropriations process. So I alert you to this issue, and one of my first asks of all of you is to ask these questions. Many of you don't just serve foster youth, many of your programs also are open to not just foster youth, but also homeless youth. So by the sheer nature of that, you have an advocacy opportunity here to make your voice known in making sure that the young people that you serve have access to these additional resources through the CARES Act. Now, certainly the CARES Act does not have all the answers we need. If you remember reading our last newsletter, the CARES Act does have some shortcomings that really limit its full impact, specifically as it relates to SNAP for the populations that we've served. And I outlined those concerns in our last newsletter, so I'm not going to reiterate them here. Next slide, Amy. All right. So now that we have an understanding of what has recently been passed or advised through administrative policy, I want to alert you to some new proposed legislation that has the ability to substantially improve outcomes for college-enrolled foster youth, and to encourage all of you to contact your elected officials to sign on to this critical piece of legislation. HR 7947 is a bill that was introduced by the Ways and Means Committee. It is bipartisan. It includes all the members of the Ways and Means Committees, both Republicans and Democrats, who are all acknowledging that there are critical things that we need to do, and that this bill is targeted to be included in the next COVID-19 package. As many of you know, the Senate will not be entertaining a COVID-19 package until after Labor Day, so you have some time between now and then to pick up the phone or send an email to advocate and put pressure on your elected officials to include this particular bill in the next round discussion after Labor Day is over. So I want to clarify how this bill looks different from HR 6848, which was the bill that I outlined for you in our last newsletter. So in essence, this new proposal that literally just dropped this month will override, expand, or replace, however you want to see it, the Pandemic Protection for Transition Age Foster Youth Act that was introduced by the Foster Youth Caucus back in May. That particular bill was also bipartisan, and this new bill, 7947, has all of the provisions that 6848 had in it, and then some. So I want to make sure that you're aware of each of these provisions and what has been added onto HR 6848. So if you remember from the newsletter that was published, HR 6848 did two major things. One was to suspend certain education and work requirements for youth who would otherwise age out of eligibility for CHAFE benefits during the coronavirus pandemic. So it was really focused on that specific piece. So HR 7947 expands on that in several ways. First, it includes an additional allotment of CHAFE dollars to the total of an additional $400 million for CHAFE for fiscal year 2020. Again, this $400 million is on top of the existing appropriations allocations that were already passed out. Of that 400 million, 50 million would be reserved specifically for additional education training voucher dollars. Again, acknowledging because of COVID that dropping students' dependence on ETVs when COVID is making it very hard for students to be able to secure employment or other things in this time, that it extends for a year ETV eligibility. Instead of it ending at a student's 26th birthday, it extends it by 1 year to their 27th birthday. Once they reach 27, they're no longer eligible. So what this does is it extends ETV use by 1 year. This is a time-limited, not a permanent change. It is scheduled to expire at the end of fiscal year 2021. So this is really time-limited and is supposed to cover just the anticipated time period that people are thinking it will take before a vaccine is available to address COVID. This could definitely be revisited if in fact those estimates turn out to be longer than what folks are anticipating right now. Another big increase is the maximum allowable per student for ETV. As many of you know, historically ETVs, students can benefit up to $5,000 a year for ETV. Under the period of COVID, that allocation would increase from $5,000 to $12,000. Again, that increase is time limited and would only be available through fiscal year 2021. Like HR 6848, this next provision is copied right from that particular legislation, again, which suspends requirements that students must meet satisfactory academic progress towards completion of their degrees to be eligible for this benefit. Again, the legislation says if student is facing COVID-related barriers that impede with educational goals. That language is very general, so it remains to be seen what, if states were to implement this, you know, how they would interpret that. Again, legislative intent is to be as flexible as possible with students. And if we are successful in getting this legislation passed after Labor Day, that's something that we want to alert you to, and as advocates who are on college campuses, to make sure that you're advocating for the most flexible interpretation of that piece of the law. Okay, next slide. All right. So this next bullet is again also from that previous piece of legislation. It's focused on preventing homelessness for foster youth during the pandemic, and there are three particular provisions in which to support that idea. One is requiring states to provide youth who would otherwise age out during the public health emergency period the option to remain in care during the pandemic. And many states have reentry, but this allows voluntary reentry into care, whether or not your state has an existing reentry policy during the COVID public health emergency. And that it requires that states all have to take active efforts to notify youth of their option to reenter care. And then finally, as many of you know, Chafee has historically capped housing support services in Chafee to 30% of a state's allocation. So this piece of legislation would temporarily remove that cap again at the end of fiscal year 2021. Some additional provisions of 7947 that are new include removing the penalty for states for failing to comply with the data reporting requirements for the National Youth in Transition Database, understanding that with COVID priorities and ensuring basic needs for students, that it might be an undue burden to force data collection during this time period, so that there would not be again, a penalty during the COVID time. Another important addition in 7947 is that currently Chafee does require a state match for states to draw down Chafee dollars. Under 7947, the state match would be waived temporarily. Again, the changes in this particular policy, all these enhancements I talked about would only be in effect until October 1st of 2021. If advocates wanted to see these continue, you would have to advocate for the introduction of a new piece of legislation. I also want to emphasize that HR 7947 does not replace the need to reauthorize the Chafee Act, and that this is really a temporary, consider it a Band-Aid, that we will still be moving forward with efforts to champion the reauthorization of the Chafee Act. It is important for you to know, however, that it is not anticipated that this reauthorization process would be a priority or a focus in the current Congress, that likely those conversations wouldn't be entertained or started until after January of 2021. Okay, and I know in the last time that we had connected through the newsletter, I promised you when the Chafee reauthorization process begins that I will make sure that this group is able to weigh in on that process. So as soon as that happens, I will make sure to alert you. Next slide, Amy. Now, in addition to legislative updates, I also wanted to make sure that you were fully aware of what the Children's Bureau was doing in terms of updates in the area of college access and retention as well. So this month has been a big month, not just for legislation, but also for administrative policy and resource updates. So I wanted to alert you that the Children's Bureau released a new education resource entitled Educational Supports for Youth in Foster Care, and it covers these topics, which include support for helping youth complete high school, planning for post-secondary education, financial supports for post-secondary education programs, and then eligibility reviews for each of these financial supports. And historically, the Children's Bureau hasn't spent a whole lot of time combing through state-specific laws in terms of what supports are available in specific states. They have now taken the time to do that. So I have provided on this slide the link to not only that report, but to summaries of all of the state laws in terms of the different financial and campus support services that are available for students in their respective states. So this link is here for you, and it flows through the Child Welfare Information Gateway website. Next slide. I also wanted to point out that prior to us being informed that the feds were doing state-by-state work, we developed a state-specific website on tuition waivers. This is a project I've been working on independently with the Children's Bureau that we put together and maintain, because it's a lot less red tape to get this updated quickly versus the Gateway website. So I wanted to let you know that our tuition waiver website was freshly updated in July of 2020. So it has the listings of all of the tuition waivers, what they offer, and who everyone's state contact is. And I know Tony Watt is on the call right now, and I saw that Texas just put together a beautiful paper on what's going on with the tuition waiver in Texas. And I really hope, Tony, we can recruit you to showcase those findings on a future webinar, because it really is exciting, and I think it adds to the literature in this area. And I think a lot of states have become much more interested in understanding the benefits of tuition waivers, but state advocates need the research from folks like us to be able to advocate for expansion of tuition waivers in their respective states. Next slide. So I'm about halfway through my presentation, so I wanted to take the time in the middle to answer any questions specifically related to the federal policies, the administrative policies, or the state-specific statutes I referenced. Before we get into what I would consider the funnest part of this talk today, and that is having you all dream with me about what is possible that hasn't been either administratively mandated or legislatively proposed yet. So any questions about what I just presented?
So you can type your questions, again, just a reminder, you can type your questions into the chat box and I'll read those out to Angelique.
Okay. While we're waiting for people to put comments in the chat, I'm very excited about the Ways and Means bill, but it is by no means a guarantee. There will be a lot of pressure to pass COVID, but remember, in one of the other COVID packages, there was an effort to put the earlier version of that foster care specific bill, the one that came out in May, in the particular COVID package that passed in May, and it was negotiated out. So none of this is a guarantee, all of you. So I wanted to make sure that you really understood the power and importance of your voice if you believe and love what you just heard in terms of this specific piece of legislation that dropped in August, unless your elected officials hear from you that you feel that it's important. It could be yet another opportunity for that to be negotiated out. So I just want to make sure that you're doing your due diligence to advocate for that provision, because it is not a guarantee right now.
So one question that we have a couple questions so far. Can you, let's see which one. So can you give a high-level summary of state tuition waivers? How many states have one? Mm-hmm. Are they capped at certain dollar amounts? Mm-hmm. Are they restricted to certain types of post-secondary institutions?
The answer is yes, yes, and yes. So there are 22 states that have official tuition waivers. That means official legislation that supports waivers in a state. There are additional states who have scholarship programs. Some of those scholarships are statewide. They function very similarly to a tuition waiver, but do not count as a tuition waiver. So I want to be clear about that. Tuition waivers range drastically from state to state. They look very different in terms of who's eligible, how old you had to be when you aged out, how old you can be in terms of how long you can benefit. Looks very, very different by states. And I do think there's some state policies that I think are the best of the best. And if you go to the website, certainly my favorites are Connecticut. Texas has a really great tuition waiver program that's worth looking at too. Many states use tuition waiver as a last dollar resort. I know many folks who do research on tuition waivers, one of the findings that for folks that have studied it is that it's an underutilized source. But if you're in a state where it's the last dollar, it is likely that even if a student actively explores using it, they may not actually need the benefit because all of the other resources, especially if you're community college enrolled, would have fully covered tuition so that the tuition waiver wouldn't need to be applied. So that's something really important for all the researchers on the call to make sure you're controlling for that if you're studying tuition waivers. Before you jump to the conclusion of whether or not it's being underutilized, especially in those last dollar states. So I appreciate that question. If I didn't answer all of it, please feel free to ask for clarification.
So the next question, this is the only other one we have so far, is what are schools doing regarding homeless or foster youth housing on campus? I think at our school you have to show need for counseling, but not sure how that works.
You're saying counseling or housing? I'm sorry. Can
Housing.
you?
Sorry, did I say counseling? I meant housing.
Oh, okay. Okay. So in terms of housing, again, because of there's no state mandates for housing, although there are some states, like Michigan is an example of a state, because they have ILP workers on campus. If a particular campus receives ILP, Independent Living Program dollars, they have a state mandate that they have to provide housing. But because of campus-based support programs are not federally funded or state funded or use Chafee dollars, that they don't have these mandates. I know in Washington, it's an example of a scholarship state and not a tuition waiver state. There are state dollars that go to the universities, and as part of that allocation of dollars, there is a mandate that they have to keep the dorms open for students who don't have other plans or can't make other plans. So those are some examples of state organized ways to have mandates. But again, there's no federal mandate. We have the memo that's not enforceable by Jerry Milner. It is merely a recommendation. So really it's about advocating, either by university or at the state level to, to really implore universities to explore this. And I know that it's a particular barrier for community colleges where there isn't necessarily strong connections to on-campus housing. Although in community colleges have been, there's been an explosion in recent times of building dorms in community college settings.
Okay, those are the only questions we have so far. So I think you can go ahead.
Okay, wonderful. So this is my favorite part of our talk today, and that is dreaming together. So I'm going to go to the next slide. And what I want you to see first and foremost is some of the ideas that are floating around right now. And this is an election year, in that there is always new opportunities, particularly in election years, to do some dreaming. Both campaigns are looking for something, to hang their hat on. And in full disclosure, I really am not engaged in the Republican campaign, so my remarks may be biased towards the Democratic campaign, so I'm going to own that. But regardless of which aisle you sit on, any election season allows for opportunities to advocate and set an agenda as part of an election campaign. Okay, so I wanted to let you know these are the ideas specifically related to transition age youth and college enrolled foster and homeless youth that have been floated by lobbyists to date for consideration in the campaign. But I know that many of us collectively have lots of ideas and that we could add to this. So I want to talk about these ideas, and then I want to have some dialogue with all of you about how these ideas could be further refined. Now, many of the folks who are providing advocacy regarding these issues are wonderful people who understand direct service, they understand the political environment, but they may not have a research perspective. So I think this group in particular may have some unique contributions to add that have not been previously considered. So I want you to not be afraid to dream with me today. Okay, so here are some of the ideas that child welfare lobbyists have floated to date. One is the suggestion of pushing or incentivizing all states to extend foster care to age 21. As you know, that's not a federal mandate. It is a state's choice at this point to opt into foster care extension. The other is the option to provide aftercare services through age 23. That would be a new element. There's been some movement among some lobbying groups to promote asset development opportunities for older youth, which that would include our college enrolled population, with 23 being the new age cut that people are defining transition age youth. Another is revising Title IV-E policy to allow differential payments for professional foster parents as an alternative to placing teens in group care. There's a lot of opportunity for being creative as part of the FFPSA, or Family First Prevention Services Act, on what creative things can be done to reduce reliance on group and residential care settings. So this is one particular idea that was put forth, but I'm going to be really excited to hear from others on this call, your ideas. Another idea that has been floated is working with the Center for Medicaid to align the CMS Institution of Mental Disease guidance with the Family First guidance specifically related to group homes. I have embedded the CMS guidance in this PowerPoint, so you can click on it and read it. For those of you who are not just education researchers, but you also do mental health research, this may be of a particular interest for that group of people on this call. And again, I would love to have you provide your expertise on this idea. I have to say that not everybody's excited about this. So for my folks on this call who do mental health research as well as education, I'm particularly interested in your opinion on this provision. Next is identifying best practice settings and what would be appropriate for pregnant and parenting teens. Again, we're trying to reduce group care, but we know that this particular subpopulation of youth has unique needs that need to be addressed, and what is the best way to do that. Again, I think people are still trying to figure that out. So any ideas you have based on your research, I would be very interested in hearing about that. And another idea for pregnant and parenting teens, we've done very, very little in the academic world looking at the academic success, particularly of college-going students who may become pregnant or may be parenting while also enrolled in college. So there is a huge need specifically to understand that and what we could do to support pregnant and parenting teens, not just for housing and child welfare placements, but also for how do we ensure their education well-being. One of the next provisions being suggested is to support the investments in research, specifically on youth who are involved in both the child welfare and juvenile justice settings, and to link these two types of data sets to see the extent to which these systems overlap, and support young people, and whether or not any of the policies and provisions actually harm young people. And what I mean by that is, at least in Michigan, when I lived there, if a young person was in foster care and then escalated to the juvenile justice system, it was practice in that particular state that foster youth, now juvenile delinquent, would only qualify for services as defined in the juvenile justice system. So those students who, even though they were in foster care, because they were in juvenile justice system, they wouldn't be eligible for the benefits of foster care had they have stayed in that particular system. So that's just one example. Okay, the next bullet here is promoting best practice in reducing the overuse of psychotropic medications and development and support of alternative treatments. Again, with FFPSA, there's a renewed interest in mental health and substance abuse research in general. And there is interest in understanding this better, specifically as it relates to foster youth in the system. So again, for my folks who, in addition to studying education outcomes, you study mental health or substance abuse, there is an opportunity to really frame what this could look like, and I want to hear your ideas. Next is aligning the runaway and homeless youth programs with the new Family First Prevention and Family Support efforts in child welfare. Again, that would allow youth who are not necessarily foster youth or child welfare involved to have the same benefits that the FFPSA discusses for runaway and homeless youth in the same way it does for foster youth, which is really exciting. I can tell you from being on the Hill previously and advocating for legislation to support college-going foster youth, there was a hesitation of wanting to make that particular piece of legislation too narrow, meaning only foster youth, and a lot of the lobbyists were pushing to really include homeless and foster in those provisions. Many of us work at institutions that are now requiring both homeless and foster youth to be served under these targeted programs. Washington is a state that a year ago mandated that the Washington Passport be expanded to not just cover foster youth, but also homeless youth. So that is the preference of the feds, and there is precedence to show that states are also moving in that direction. And then finally, as I have been trying to keep all of your hopes up, and in advocacy work that I'm doing through NRC and beyond, this idea in the election, there's a whole lot of talk about anti-racist policies and really looking conscientiously about doing a better job in social work and in child welfare and in other aspects of our profession. Really taking a critical look at making sure that policies that are being implemented actually have equity across all of our target populations. And one of the discussions is the need to re-look at diversifying schools to ensure greater equity, and that this includes not just K-12, but also higher ed strategies. So in the higher education world, we have been advocating that this means the employment of strategies to open post-secondary pathways for the most vulnerable students, including targeted recruitment and retention efforts for foster and homeless youth. And this is where the work that we all have been directly working on fits in the campaign. So that is certainly the messaging and advocacy that has been used to date. And I'm hoping that as all of you are having your conversations with your elected officials, that this gives you some type of platform, to build so that you're using some of that same election campaign language to support your advocacy efforts. Okay, before I move to the next slide, I want you to have a chance to continue to look at this slide, but I want to invite dialogue on the specific bullets that you see here. And these are all ideas that have already been floated. These are not ideas that came directly from my head. But I wanted to get an understanding from all of you, what else should be considered in these types of advocacy efforts, what could be added to the conversation, because all of you do have unique expertise and you bring that research lens that hasn't really been engaged that heavily in the campaign so far. So you can, as Amy says, you can type your comments into the chat, or Amy, if you want to unmute people so that they can share. I don't know if you know how you want to handle that in the most organized way possible, but
sure. Yeah, if you you can either type in the chat box if you have suggestions, or if you want to, or if you just type in unmute me, I can unmute you if you'd like to talk, just speak directly. Yeah, just let me know, or go ahead and type that into the box. One question, Angelique, is can you say what you mean by asset development?
Yes, so asset development means supporting foster youth to spur on savings or investments. That could include purchasing property. It could include investments in like small business ideas for young people. It also includes matched savings accounts. So anything that has to do with helping young people, you know, establish credit, or improving, you know, their ability, you know, to engage, you know, fully in community through creating assets. So, you know, having a mortgage, you know, investing in business, opening their own business, or savings, and having matches that are supported by the feds to incentivize kids to save.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So we haven't gotten any responses yet. Oh, one just came in. Let's see. So a federal mandate for priority access to on-campus housing for youth in foster care and unaccompanied homeless youth.
Can you say that again? I'm just taking notes and it flashed on the screen and it went away. I didn't get it all.
Oh, sure. Federal mandate for priority access to on-campus housing for foster youth and unaccompanied homeless youth.
Okay, so I want, for this person that provided this, I just want to get a little bit more detail on for priority access. Does that mean that if a student on their FAFSA form clicks foster or homeless youth, that they would have access to dorms before other students? Has there been an issue in other people's states about a kid needing access to a dorm and the dorms were full so they couldn't access? I just want to understand the issue for this advocacy point and what you hope to see when you say federal mandate for priority access.
And if the person who posted that comment is interested in being unmuted and talking with our presenter, if you want to just say that in the chat box, I can unmute you.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I get your recommendations correct.
Okay. Okay, Lori, are you there?
Yeah, hi, thank you. I'm looking at, in terms of where I'm currently in Washington State at Western Washington University, and we're looking at conversations of students that are applying, first-year students, instead of having them in sort of a wait stance in terms of being on campus, or even other students that need to transfer from being out in the community to on campus, just a priority, just that they are given priority so that they can get housing first before other students, since their needs, because of their needs. Something similar to California. The state of California has priority housing for unaccompanied foster youth, which they mandated in 2009, and then in 2015 they included that for unaccompanied homeless youth. So I've been just sort of researching what they've been doing in California with that, and I just think that that would be amazing to have.
Okay, wonderful. And it seems like a low-bearing fruit request, actually, mandating states to do that. It doesn't hurt their bottom line. It doesn't hurt the state to mandate that. It seems like a low-bearing fruit win-win recommendation to me.
And Amy, I'm just going to say too, and it also actually prevents students our students to continually have to tell their stories over and over, where if they're being referred from some of our support programs to priority housing, that they will get that spot without having to continually have to tell their stories if they don't want to.
Got it. Great. Thank you for clarifying. That helps me so much.
Thank you, Lori. I appreciate that. So our next, Nate, would you be okay if I unmute you? Okay, go for it. Oh, sorry. Thought I did. Okay. Nate?
Hey everyone. All right, so this is definitely not a low-hanging fruit, because it would require a substantial federal investment. But the idea is to have some separate funding line that would support campus programs for youth with foster care histories, or possibly even homeless youth. Just because a lot of these programs are trying to cobble up funding from private sources, public sources, all different things. It's a fundraising scramble, every year, every few years. So just to have kind of a stable source of funding would be the idea, kind of like the ETV funding, and not just expanding the rules to allow Chafee service funding to cover these programs, because that's already stretched pretty thin.
Right, agreed. And the last bullet is exactly that, is using that diversifying schools to do that. And there has been a bill, which is nice, and some formulas that's already been done. And I think the estimate was 125 million to support campus support. Although when they put that together, they included support for recruitment as well as retention in that formula allocation. To clarify, since we're dreaming, Nate, do you feel like that allocation should be retention only, or do you see the mandate for recruitment of this population to also be equally important?
Sorry, I think I have to re-unmute.
There we go. I think recruitment is important also. And this is kind of a separate idea. Where, one is, just as a researcher, I would love to see states make better use of their administrative data. Just tracking where youth are going to college, where they're not going to college, but also, possibly having a youth caseworker play a part in this in terms of getting youth into college. So, for example, changing the law so that on a youth's TILP, their 6-month agreements that they have to create, having a caseworker ask youth, do you want to go to college, yes or no? And if a youth who says yes, then then it should be required that they automatically apply for federal financial aid and possibly for an ETV, and that kind of like triggers a link to a whole bunch of different sources. That would be, it's not a low-hanging fruit, but I think that's a little bit more, less of a big financial ask.
Okay, so you're talking about in child welfare workforce training to be including that as, I just want to clarify. So in terms of making this something that child welfare workers have to do you see that best aligning with child welfare workforce training? Or I just want to make sure I'm putting this in the right spot.
That second part would align with child welfare workforce training.
Okay.
But just to answer your original question, I think some of the money would be great to help out with recruitment and strengthening relationships between child welfare departments and schools. So child welfare departments have a better sense of where their youth are going to colleges, strengthening relationships with those colleges, just to help create a recruitment pipeline.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nate. That gives me all the clarity I need on that. All right, perfect.
Thanks, Nate. So our next, so Brenna Share, I'm going to unmute you. So you also have a recommendation to share. Okay, go for it.
Hi. I work with foster kids, mainly teens and young adults, doing child preparation services and child-specific recruitment, things like that. And a good number of the kids that I work with, once they turn 18, they're out. They're happy to be done with everybody. They want to be left alone to their own devices. And as is expected, they find a lot of roadblocks. I'm in Pennsylvania, and you have 6 months to sign back into care after you've signed out of care before age 21. So that's always an option, but a lot of them don't take advantage of that. So they flounder and they need help. And as a former child preparation worker for them, a lot of times they'll reach out to me and be like, I'm in this situation, what can I do? Or whether it be, I need resources or I need somebody to talk to. I have one girl who struggled through community college and trying to figure out where to live and things like that. So my fantasy has always been to have a program where there would be a mentor assigned to a child after they leave care, totally voluntary, but there just in case for, I don't know, let's say a year. and then it could be reevaluated after that. Just some adult that could guide them through the challenges that they have if they're really insistent on not coming back into care.
I like that. That's a novel idea on how to address reentry. That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brenna. So our other comment that we had was from Tony Watt. And so she was building on Nate's comment, and she said, I'd love to see funding for campus support programs. If a program is too much to ask, it could initially be like the Texas legislation that required each college and university to have a designated campus liaison. We've advocated that the liaison be someone with lived experience in the foster care system.
So just to clarify, Tony, you're wanting me to amend this legislation to require that the campus support program, they need to fill that spot with a foster care alum? I just want to make sure I'm hearing that clearly.
And she said, yes. So, and I think she was also just kind of reiterating the importance of funding for campus support programs in general, as well as the additional layering of that, of having young people with, or people with the lived experience to fulfill those roles.
Okay, perfect. All right, thank you for that clarity.
So that's all the comments we've had so far, and I'm noticing we just have about 3 minutes left. So.
Oh my goodness, see, Amy, nine slides, and I can tell you, we can go on 9 slides and go for an hour. All right, so there's just a couple more slides that I'll move to and be quick, but I want to emphasize that you're dreaming with me, that this time that we've had together is just one moment, and that I want you all to continue to dream with me as you spend time processing these questions and think of cool new ideas after this talk is over, that I want you to continue to share those with me. And I am ecstatic to be able to build a formal NRC policy advocacy agenda that we can then share legislatively. I think that's the next step I want for this organization, and I can't do that with all of you dreaming with me, so thank you so much. All right, next slide, Amy. All right, so now that we've talked about some of those other dreaming things, the next thing that I wanted to ask you again, we're going to talk about this for the 3 minutes we have, and then I want you to send me your ideas after this talk. So there's 2 things I want to talk about. One is, I told you all that Chafee reauthorization is not going to happen till the next election is over, and Chafee reauthorization has to happen regardless of which party ends up in the presidency after the election. And I would like your thoughts on what you would like to see included in the next Chafee reauthorization package, which is not all of the things we've talked about would be things that would fit in Chafee reauthorization. So I want you to continue to think about and dream with me on that. And then the other piece is that, you know, the homeless lobby is powerful, and I would say they have actually way more advocates than the foster youth advocates do. On as many of us are exploring expanding our services to not just foster youth, but also homeless youth, what is your vision of what you would like to see so that your campuses feel like they have the resources they need? If you were to be asked to expand to homeless youth, what would you need to do that job well?
So Angelique, is it okay, since we don't have any more time today, is it okay if I type your email address into the chat box and then people can reach out to you with their comments and thoughts on this?
You can. I think the last slide was my contact information, but I want to do that. I've asked you huge, big questions. We really are dreaming together. And I know I'm asking a whole lot from all of you, but you all are amazingly smart people with personal experience working with this population, research experience. You have a lot of expertise to lend to this conversation, and I want to make sure that your voices are heard. So on the last slide, Amy, if you want to pull it up, there is my contact information. Again, my goal is to take your thoughts and build an NRC specific advocacy agenda and shop that to the legislature and to the campaign. And obviously many of us, you know, have expertise that is transition age youth beyond the campus-based stuff. So I want you to dream in both ways for me. You know, sometimes a crisis breeds an opportunity, and there's no bigger crisis than the crisis we are in now. So I know I'm at time. Amy, you were worried I wasn't going to have enough. I knew I could talk. So I just want to thank all of you. Please continue to dream with me. I will be collecting your dreams and visions until Election Day. So please keep those coming. I need your help.
Great. Thank you so much, Angelique. I appreciate you being here with us today. So just a reminder, everyone, this presentation, as are all of our presentations, will be posted on the NRC FAHE website within the next few days. So you can see this as well as past presentations there. Thanks so much for coming, and I hope that you'll join us for a future webinar. Thanks, Angelique.
You are welcome. Thank you, everyone.